we're staying in the deep end on this one, and turning our attention next to a particularly grisly story from the weekend. You'll be aware already of the white supremacist terrorist whose racially motivated hate crimes in Buffalo this weekend left 10 people dead, deliberately targeting black people. You may be less familiar with the following phrases: great replacement theory and critical race theory, right? Now, I'm going to personalise this because I do this for a living, and without being unduly immodest, there are not that many voices in the British media doing what we do together every morning. And I have looked away from online trumpeting of these two theories, these two phenomena, on the grounds that the people doing the trumpeting are either Nazis or irredeemably stupid, or both. Okay? So the argument that great replacement theory sees left-wing politicians seek to replace the population of Western countries with people from non-Western countries, Middle Eastern countries or third world countries, because they will be more likely to vote for the left-wing politicians, is so pant-wettingly stupid that I have never given it the time of day. Not least because it is generally right-wing politicians who dream of a much more pliant population, who dream of a much more, quote, obedient, end quotes, population. Totalitarianism, even if it starts off claiming to be left-wing, as in the case of Joseph Stalin or similar, it never ends up being a masterclass in equality of opportunity and common decency. It is right-wing politicians, right-wing dictators who routinely triumph and fare best when a population has been either manipulated or cowed into obsequiousness, cowed into obedience. So, I mean, it is just stupid. Critical race theory, I'm afraid I'm still not entirely sure what that is. Again, I see it being espoused online by people who are, to my untutored eye, either Nazis or irredeemably stupid, or both. But it seems just to be the acknowledgement of institutional racism. You know, like the thing I mentioned to you at the very top of the show today. So this killer in Buffalo is described everywhere as a teenager, a white supremacist teenager, no less. Show me the story. Well, I mean, look, they will exist, so this isn't a gotcha. But if an 18-year-old black boy had committed 10 murders this weekend, he would not be described as a boy or a teenager. He would be described as an 18-year-old black man. Just, I mean, massively in the main, a huge disproportionate representation. You may find examples of this bloke being described as a white man, and you may find examples of black criminals being described as a black boy, but the picture is clear, and the numbers will be plain. So the critical race theory simply teaches, I think, and I could be wrong, I'll make it clear, I could be explaining stuff like that. I could be explaining stuff like that if I had a better grasp of it, and I don't, because I've never seen the point. I've always thought, you know, this was one of the only outlets in the British media that never let Anjem Chowdhury anywhere near the microphone on exactly the same premise. I just thought examining the nuttiness of their worldview will do more harm than good. And I still think that was the right call. Even as white supremacist rhetoric reaches into corners of what we laughably call the mainstream media, I still don't think it's right to engage with it, because if you engage with it, you somehow validate it. And then I began to look into a little bit about this particular character's so-called manifesto, which ran to hundreds of pages. He's far from the first, by the way. The lone gunman, the countless shootings involving radicalized, solitary white supremacists. There was one in El Paso who he posted a document online as well, stating that he had killed 21 people in his attack as a response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. 4 years earlier, there was an attack on a black community church in Charleston, South Carolina, by a self-confessed white supremacist that left 9 dead. In October 2018, a white man shouted, "All Jews must die," as he burst into a synagogue in Pittsburgh and shot dead 11 worshippers, wounding 6 others. A synagogue in San Diego was the scene of a similar shooting in April of 2019. Again, a 19-year-old who had posted messages of racial hatred online. And this character uses both of those phrases in his so-called manifesto. We learn about the Great Replacement theory and we learn about critical race theory, which are beginning to creep into what you might loosely describe as mainstream right-wing commentary in this country. It's such a lucrative grift to tell people who are privileged but really don't feel it, not feeling privileged at all. It's such a lucrative grift to tell them that they're under attack. It's like the chicken lickinification. That one's not going to catch on, is it? The chicken lickinification. You try saying that before you put your teeth in. Of society. You take people who have had centuries of privilege and you tell them that they're under attack. You're under attack. Remember Farage talking about people speaking foreign on the train? That's part of the same sort of mental process. You're under attack. You're under attack. They're trying to replace you. They're trying to I mean, it is so obviously stupid that most of us just look the other way and go, okay, has it popped up on Question Time yet? Have we had someone on Question Time talking about critical race theory or great replacement theory? I genuinely don't know, and because I don't watch it, but if I did, I'd turn it off. And I don't know if that's the right approach to take. That's going to be the question that I ask you, whether or not, well, this sort of white supremacist rhetoric seems to me to be horrifyingly prevalent. Here is a presenter called Tucker Carlson on a station called Fox News, which is owned by a man called Rupert Murdoch, who I think it's fair to say exercises a modicum of influence over public discourse in this country.
Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. Let's say that again for emphasis, because it is the secret to the entire immigration debate. Demographic change is the key to the Democratic Party's political ambitions. In other words, you're being replaced and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up. I mean, they're trying to change the population of the United States, and they hate it when you say that because it's true. Our country's being invaded by the rest of the world. Let me just state unequivocally, the country's being stolen from American citizens as we watch. In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries.
Legacy Americans. I presume he's not talking about Native Americans, is he? He's not talking about sort of Navajos and the Mohicans or anything like that. He's talking about the descendants of people that went over on the Mayflower or whatever it might be. I don't know. The projection is off the scale, isn't it? Do you hear him describing those who disagree with him as hysterical? And then he literally bursts into hysteria 5 minutes later. So... And the gatekeepers on Twitter who go hysterical when they talk about it. As I said to you a moment ago, my response to this kind of thing has always been just to look away. And now you have 10 people dead, murdered by a white supremacist terrorist who subscribes to exactly the same school of thought. I've got quite a lot to say about this, actually, and it's already 14 minutes past 11, because Sadiq Khan gets a mention as well, the Mayor of London, who you will know, because I occasionally read them out, comes in for precisely this sort of abuse when he is in this studio. Racist killer named Sadiq Khan as an enemy. He singled out the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, who, of course, it was reported last week, the research had shown that when Donald Trump was banned from Twitter, the amount of racist abuse, death threats and similar that Sadiq Khan was exposed to fell exponentially. So this stuff is not coincidental, is it? Imagine for a moment what would have happened to the British media this morning if an Islamist terrorist had killed 10 people in Buffalo and published a manifesto in which Boris Johnson was singled out as a particular problem and a particular enemy. Just take a second. Just seriously, stop what you're doing. Obviously, if you're driving or operating heavy machinery, ignore me. What would the British media have done this morning? Daily Mail has got some football fans booing Prince William on its front page. What would the British media have done this morning if an Islamist terrorist in Buffalo had killed 10 people and then published a manifesto which singled out Boris Johnson for abuse? Yeah? Exactly. So, talk me through why this story doesn't get anything like the response that the terror attacks in Nice, or the terror attacks in Paris, or you name it. a terror attack undertaken by a brown man. And you can turn on your television in America right now, and there'll be like little pound shop versions, no doubt, in the British media as well. You can turn on your radio or turn on your internet right now, and you'll have people being paid by prominent media organisations to espouse precisely the poison that coursed through the bloodstream of this white supremacist terrorist in Buffalo at the weekend. So I got two questions. The first is, how deep does this run in our own country? I don't know, and I should. I follow Hope Not Hate. I keep an eye on their work, but I don't engage. See someone espousing essentially Nazi ideology, I treat them in the same way that I treated someone like Anjem Chowdhury or Abu Hamza. I think one of them rang into the programme once, but I certainly never joined the queue of producers and presenters inviting these people onto the programme in the hope of garnering clicks and controversy. And I've always adopted the same attitude with the far right, with the Nazi worldview, and I'm intending to continue to do so. But here's the question I need you to answer. And then let's take those two phrases right there. Great replacement theory and critical race theory, poisonous doctrines that curdled what passed for this man's brain, prompting him to murder 10 black people in Buffalo because of the colour of their skin. Because of the colour of their skin. Has that got a foothold in the UK? 03456060973 is the number you need. And the second question, and I want you to take any angle you want on this, all right? The second question is a bit closer to home. The British media. And some of the answers to this won't necessarily be critical. There might be sensible answers to this that are just to do with dog bites man versus man bites dog. But why would a story about a white supremacist terrorist in America killing 10 people and then singling out the elected mayor of London for particular abuse in his so-called manifesto, why does that barely register in the British media? Well, no, it registers. Why does that not register on anything like the scale it would if an Islamist terrorist killed 10 people in Buffalo and singled out Boris Johnson? And don't say because he's Prime Minister and he's the Mayor of London. Just for the purposes of this conversation, let's go back to when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London. Why? And you can add in if you want, if it helps you get to the answer to that second question. How the hell can anybody be talking about Prince William being booed at a football game today when the Mayor of London has been singled out? The elected Mayor of the capital city of our country is named as an enemy in the manifesto of a white supremacist terrorist who's killed 10 people in Buffalo. That's not a wake-up call. I don't know what is. But neither do I know whether these poisonous doctrines, great replacement theory, critical race theory, have already got a grip upon the minds of impressionable young men, lonely young men in this country, and whether or not the hate preachers of the Western world are already halfway down the track where I'm still lacing up my sneakers. The more I think about it, the more I wonder whether the big question is, why on earth would the tale of a white supremacist teenager killing 10 people at a supermarket in Buffalo, singling out the elected Mayor of London as a target in his hate-filled manifesto, why on earth would that garner so much less attention in Britain in 2022 than an Islamist terrorist would have done if they'd done the same to Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London? And I'll take any answer you've got to that question. Nick's in Camden. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hi. You inspired me to call because this is a...
You sound surprised. You sound surprised, Nick.
You get such good callers who really know their stuff that I didn't feel I could sort of match their standards.
I'm sure you'll do fine. Carry on.
Oh, thank you. This problem in America is not new, and the people now calling for abortion to be banned were formed from the segregationists, and once they lost that battle, they had to rile people up some way. So certain right-wing people turned the evangelicals against gays and against black people and against abortion, I mean. And so it's been lurking in the background. And then Trump, as you know, gave permission to all the right-wing lunatics to come out from under their rocks.
Good people on both sides, Nick.
Good people on both sides, exactly.
Nazis and anti-Nazis, to put it
extraordinary,
simply.
isn't it? And Antifa are a terrorist organisation, being anti-fascist.
So are Black Lives Matter.
And Black Lives Matter. And critical race theory. I think I was talking to somebody yesterday in London who was angry at the notion of white privilege.
Yes.
And it occurred to me that it's just very badly put. White privilege sounds, it's almost confrontational.
Yes. And also, you're telling people, like a lot of the callers we've taken during the cost of living crisis, who feel anything but privileged at the moment.
No privilege whatsoever.
No,
exactly.
You're telling them that. My friend John Amaechi puts it best, where he simply says, on the list of burdens that you carry, the colour of your skin isn't one of them, but no one is denying or diluting the weight of the burdens that you carry.
Exactly. But trying to get people to see that when they are struggling and not able to buy more than one meal a day or have to ride the buses to keep warm, that they are privileged, it's insane to them.
Yes.
And you can't help but sympathise with that. So I think it's a badly put.
No, of course, no, but of course, it is badly put, but then it is exploited. If you like, the suboptimal nature of the phrasing is exploited by people who know exactly what they're doing when they say, "Look, you know, over there, someone who can't feed his children and is going to a food bank. That lefty over there on Twitter, he thinks you're privileged. He's saying that you're privileged. You've got all these, and the rabble rousers, the provocateurs, the columnists and the commentators. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what it means, exactly how true it is." And exactly how easy it is to pretend that it's something very different that they can use to promote their own insidious agendas.
Well, exactly. And people like Tucker Carlson, who, as you said, knows exactly what the truth is, what these statements, these phrases mean. He twists it around to rile less educated, not always less educated.
No,
but
not
usually
always less educated. And it's the old story. You are under attack. You are under attack. You are under attack. And that's a heady brew.
The victim.
It's a heady brew. I don't think...
turning these people into terrorists.
Well, that's, and not all of them. But, of course, the same is true of Islamist extremism. And yet... the speed with which people conflate one with all in that context is considerably quicker than it is in this context. Nick, you did very well. I'm just going to jump off the back of that to point out you understood this, but quite a few people in my inbox don't. And it's probably my fault as well for not explaining it better. So great replacement theory is bonkers. Critical race theory is not. So the critical race theory is the sworn enemy of the kind of people that endorse the great replacement theory. So I thought I'd been clear. Nick understood, but there are sufficient people in my inbox for me to clarify this. So critical race theory essentially teaches what racism is, where it comes from, what it looks like, and proves its existence. And the kind of people who would espouse great replacement theory absolutely despise the notion of critical race theory. I presume that ridiculous report the government spun, because it was spun rather differently from some of its contents, trying to claim that there was no such thing as endemic racism in this country. I presume that's the same mindset that condemns critical race theory. It's like it's seeking to deny that racism exists, which is relatively commonplace in conservative circles now, because the alternative would be, as with poverty, to admit that you haven't achieved your status in life by dint of luck and accident. You've achieved it by dint of genius and effort. Nick, thank you. It's a sparkling debut. I don't know what you were worried about. And if anyone wants to have a crack at that second bit of it, what would happen if an Islamist terrorist in America had killed 10 people this weekend and posted a manifesto which singled out the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, as a particular enemy of this worldview? Daniel's in Finchley. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think just your question on sort of great replacement theory,
yes.
Is it happening here? I think...
I mean the rhetoric, not the replacement, just for the avoidance of doubt.
Yeah, just the rhetoric. Look at the direction of travel, then it's obvious that we're heading in that direction, it's going to be impossible to actually break down and define to what extent it's happening. But I would suggest there's much more value in focusing resource on what we need to do to find the solution, which also points to what you're talking about, the media and the reporting of what's happened. Again, it's a narrative, it's a direction of travel that we've been moving in incrementally over a number of years now.
I don't actually agree with you yet, but you probably are more au fait with this than I am. I don't believe that there is a wide... But then again, I've been taken by surprise by the extremities of politics in recent years, more times than I care to admit. But I don't believe there is a widespread subscription to the idea that... I mean, for example, the numbers, there's a great piece by John Burns-Murdoch in the FT about immigration now is higher than it's ever been, and yet it's the lowest that it's ever been on the list of public concern. So I don't believe there's a widespread subscription at this point in this country to the idea that woke politicians are trying to bring in people from overseas and replace the indigenous tribes of Northern Europe with... I mean, I'm doing you a disservice by already going into comedy mode, aren't I? By using the words and probably even using the voice. But I don't believe it's as widespread as you do.
And well, no, I'm not saying it is widespread.
But you're saying that's the direction we're heading in?
Direction.
Okay.
Yeah, direction.
Oh, right. I can see why you think that.
It's direction of travel, and in the same way, it takes a tank however long to turn around. The biggest issue I think we have in this country are incremental steps, direction of travel. So the incremental steps, one by themselves, people look at and go, I may not agree with that, but not the end of the world. We can get on with it. It's exactly in that sense. Look at what happened pre-war Germany. Hitler was considered a joke.
Yeah.
So what was the environment or narrative that supported it to end up where it ended up 10 years later? And the only foil to this is education.
Well, you're terrifying me now, because I've come pretty close to saying that it's a joke, haven't I, in the last half an hour?
Well, history, how many times have we seen people,
but I bet there's loads of times where something awful was described as a joke and it stayed a joke. Just because Hitler didn't doesn't necessarily... Well, I'm sounding a bit desperate now, aren't I?
No, it's valid. However... The way to combat it is through education, and also when you look at what's happening in the media and journalism narrative, what's informing that narrative, and ultimately, I think if you bring these issues into consciousness and awareness, especially actually for young people,
yes,
I say you'd be amazed. They invariably come up with the right answer, whatever the right answer is.
Well, yeah, I mean, apart from these lonely, alienated youths who fall for it, presumably spending an awful lot of time on the internet and swallowing. Because, I mean, how could all you got to do is stick your head out the window. The great replacement theory, what a load of old cobblers. And also the anti-critical race theory school of thought that simply denies the observable reality of the last several hundred years. Yeah, and very politely, not picking me up necessarily on the failure to challenge it more. I just don't know. It'd be great if someone rang in to espouse great replacement theory. It'd be a viral clip, wouldn't it, by tea time? But you never know, do you, how many people watch that? My old interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg popped up again over the weekend. Almost every single thing he said in that interview proving to be absolute bunkum. But you've still got a tiny number of headbangers who insist that he played an absolute blinder. And I don't know that when you engage with people espousing demonstrably ridiculous and untrue philosophies, the people who are desperate to believe it can't be reached. And you never know how many people can be reached but currently believe it. You never know. And it's a big risk. Not a chastened James O'Brien necessarily, but feeling perhaps a little bit silly because... as this tweet points out from 1884 and all that, great replacement theory has arrived in the UK, maybe not as widespread as it is in America, but it is here, particularly aimed at Sadiq Khan and the myth of him turning London into the Muslim capital of the world. And I hadn't knitted the two together. That is a regular feature in the bile that comes into the studio when the Mayor of London is here taking your calls on a regular basis. We haven't done that for a while, actually, come to think of it. That is very much of what you see, and it's never really espoused by... it's not espoused, as far as I can tell, by people who actually have their eyes open and live in London. It seems more to be a bit like the kind of anti-immigration rhetoric of Brexit. People who live miles away from where multiculturalism or cosmopolitanism real and present, but they've somehow been made terrified of the idea of people who don't look like them moving in next door. So it all springs from the same well, I think, and that would be a British example of it. Back to the conversation we were having, which looks at a few elements of the appalling terror attack in Buffalo, New York at the weekend. A white supremacist who killed 10 people at a supermarket singled out London Mayor Sadiq Khan as a target in a hate-filled manifesto shared online. I can't help it because I do this for a living. I can't help wondering what would have happened if an Islamist terrorist had done similar to Boris Johnson a few years ago, 03456060973. But the fact that the talking points, if you like, or the rhetorical phenomena that this terrorist cited in his so-called manifesto read like a transcript of a monologue from Fox News, particularly from one presenter who has talked about great replacement theory, the idea, and I still can't say it with a straight face, the idea that left-wing politicians are trying to bring lots and lots of people into the country from elsewhere because those people will then vote for left-wing politicians. But you can't laugh when people are killing. Well, you couldn't you? You could laugh at the idea that you were going to get 50 virgins in heaven if you committed a terrorist atrocity in New York, and you can laugh at the idea that left-wing politicians, but it's bittersweet laughter. And then the opposition to critical race theory, which again I've stumbled across in the darker reaches of the internet, but I worry that my own approach of generally ignoring extremists means I'm not aware of how widespread the problem already is here. And those are the 2 or 3 angles on which you can come in to this conversation. Az is in Forest Hill. Az, what would you like to say?
James, good morning. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
James, at the top of the hour, you mentioned CRT, critical race theory, and I wanted to give people a bit of more understanding, really,
Please,
as to why it's being used. You remember when people were in school as a kid and somebody would just, do a fart or drop a stink bomb in the classroom and then walk out?
Yes.
And then everybody else would be saying, oh, you did it. And you get people, pointing the finger.
Yeah.
This is what CRT has been used for. It's just been dropped into the political conversation as a stink bomb. And people have walked out and said, right, we've got them distracted.
So they don't really know what it is, but they've accepted the invitation to be very angry about it.
So this is where you have to understand, where did critical race theory come from? It was taught at universities, specifically those students who are studying law. At no other place was it being taught in the United States of America. So the proponents of critical race theory are Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw, who espoused how race intersects with the law of African American people.
Which already, to me, sounds supremely uncontroversial.
Right. But then what that is now meaning is that people are now afraid to understand or be taught the history of the United States of America. And if people understand what the history of the United States of America is, it was found in settler colonialism, the enslavement of black African people, etc., etc., Jim Crow laws passed, etc. And this is where it comes from. So you've seen adult after adult who are parents go to their school board meetings and say, I don't want my children to be taught history or CRT, blah, 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 blah. This is, they've completely achieved what they wanted to achieve.
So they've made people feel threatened. They've made people who aren't really aware of what they're supposed to be frightened of feel very frightened. And they are supposed to be frightened of men like you. Let's not beat about the bush. They're supposed to be frightened of the person of colour, the black man or
Exactly. So you've seen this particular individual. Let's just call him an individual because I don't have the words to say. He's not deranged. People need to step away from calling him an individual.
Yeah.
Whatever that manifesto that he's written and posted online, he had help. He drove hundreds of miles. If you're deranged, you probably couldn't even get out of bed in the morning. So he did this deliberately to go and kill people who are civil rights leaders themselves in their own community, 72-year-old woman, 52-year-old man who was the ex-police man. The list of people he's killed for no other reason than that they're black or they're Latino. Yeah. Or there might be some Jewish people in there. This is not something that's deranged. This was planned, and they planted a seed in this person's head to think that, this is the way to stop whatever Tucker Carlson has been telling me about, which, of course, is not true.
Yeah.
So Tucker Carlson laughing the way that he was maniacally. I was watching CNN last night, and they were talking to the head of the NAACP. For those who don't know, it's the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People. Yeah. Thurgood Marshall was the first African-American lawyer who worked for the NAACP elected to the Supreme Court, selected to the Supreme Court in the United States of America. So if you tie all of these things together, and I only have a few seconds to tell you these things.
You do, but you're doing a great job.
It's really, really complicated, but for people who've been studying it like myself, it's like night and day. It's easy to see, right? It's easy to see.
But you have to want to see it, and you have to look hard. And you've got so many voices on the other side who are inflating it's a furious ignorance, isn't it? Or an ignorant fury.
James, you don't want to accept that this is a conspiracy or some sort of. But just look at
I don't want to accept yet that it's widespread here. But I think
just look at the way that the media, as your previous caller said, the slow tick, the drip drip. There were. I mean, I don't even want to bring the journalist who was killed in Palestine the other day into the conversation, but it was the reporting of what happened to her. You've already said it. The adultification of black people. Yes. This man is a teenager, but a black person would be a man. So there were clashes between Palestinians and Israelis. Well, they weren't. And if you're not honest, and people are not honest, and this is deliberate. This is not an accident. This is deliberate. And the thing is, James, you have to be able to see it from my perspective, or the things that I've studied, the people that I listen to, so that you can actually see these things. It's really, really comcomplicated.
It is really complicated, but it's also pretty. I mean, here's an example. Sean Hannity, who's another Fox News presenter, described Adam Toledo was a 13-year-old man, whereas Kyle Rittenhouse, who was 17 at the time, was a little boy.
Well, I mean, I could put in there Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin. Tamir Rice had a toy gun. He was 11, 12 years of age. They didn't even ask him to put his hand. They just shot him dead. Small boy.
And critical race theory explains why that's not a coincidence in the context of race and law, and therefore the question of how anyone could possibly have a problem with that, in many ways, answers itself, and it's an ugly, ugly answer. Thank you. 12 noon is the time, and then you come back to the age-old question of why some people are so desperate to be frightened, why they are so desperate to believe that the sky is falling in, or that their way of life is under attack, or that the Western world is on its last legs. It's such a lucrative grift, and yet all it does is, and on a lower level, it makes you angry and frightened all the time, and on a much, much higher level, it turns you into a white supremacist terrorist, or a white supremacist terrorist sympathiser. There is literally no plus. There is literally no win for the victims of the con. But of course, the actual con artists go from strength to strength. The more I talk about this, particularly thanks to callers of the calibre we've had so far, most recently the more I wonder whether we do, and listen, I'm not going to come up with it in 10 minutes, am I? But the more I wonder whether those of us, if you like, on the side of light do need to up our game a little bit, because the forces of darkness are gathering pace. A racist killer named Sadiq Khan as an enemy. This is a white supremacist terrorist in America who killed 10 people in Buffalo, New York, and then had a manifesto, which he published online, claiming that Sadiq Khan, born in Tooting, is part of a great replacement theory which will see people from non-white backgrounds overcoming and overtaking people from white backgrounds, because that will somehow deliver a different political status quo. I get it, but I don't get it, if you see what I mean. It also mentioned the Rotherham child sex abuse scandal. It's almost as if they've been getting their talking points from British far-right media as much as they have from American. And that's also used as a case for white supremacy. So because criminals of a certain ethnicity exist, we ignore the fact that criminals of a different ethnicity also exist. How can brown criminals be an argument in favour of white supremacy? And that's the problem. None of this is logical. But that's not the point, is it? We're living in a period of unprecedented lack of logic in political ways, whether you're talking about the B word or whether you're talking about Donald Trump. There is an electoral popularity to positions that are not rooted in reality, and which are largely defined by opposition, by hatred, by anger, by fear, by the chicken lickenification of politics. Here is someone telling you that the sky is falling in, watch their shows, read their columns, vote for them, it's grim to watch. So we continue this conversation with the two angles I've taken. No one yet's had a swing at why this has been reported in a very different way from how it would have been if an Islamist killer had... Actually, do you know what? Someone did point out that I was looking at it the wrong way round. I've lost the message, but it's suggesting that if Boris Johnson had been singled out as a particular enemy of an Islamist terrorist, it would be a badge of honour for a British politician. But why wouldn't it be a badge of honour for Sadiq Khan to be singled out by a white supremacist terrorist? That can be the question, if you like. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And we might deploy our rabbit hole theory. This is something that we stumbled across during the coronavirus pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, when I found it increasingly difficult to tempt people onto the... Well, I didn't want people on the programme who were espousing lunatic theories. There's plenty of them out there. But I was interested in what you can do if you have someone like that in your life. So if you have someone in your life who subscribes to either the great replacement theory or the idea that critical race theory poses a very real threat to them, then tell me where it comes from. Tell me what radicalised. That's the question, isn't it? God, we're nearly an hour into this yet, and that's the ultimate question, is what radicalised them? Answer Tucker Carlson in the case of America, but what about the UK? I don't think you can even get Fox News here, although you can watch the clips online. Inevitably, perhaps, one of those, I don't know actually, someone will tell me who this is, because I've seen him before. He's done a lot of work with Donald Trump fans, and he goes to the rallies and puts a microphone in front of people. It's a bit like the one I played you the other week about why you should choose adoption over abortion. And they went down and asked all of the women there waving signs saying, choose adoption, not abortion, how many children they'd adopted or whether they'd done any adoption. And, of course, none of them had. This is what happens when someone who is almost, adamant that critical race theory is their sworn enemy gets asked relatively simple questions.
What's the most important issue in the governor's race here in Virginia?
Getting back to the basics of teaching children, not teaching them critical race theory.
And what is critical race theory?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it because I don't understand it that much, but it's something that what little bit that I know I don't care for.
And what have you heard that you don't?
Well,
that you don't like?
I'm not going to, I don't have that much knowledge on it, but It's something that I don't care for.
10 minutes after 12 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Ruby's in Bristol. Ruby, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Thank the stars for LBC. I'm a big fan. I discovered you in 2018, and I've been glued to you all ever since.
Fantastic. Better late than never.
Bit nervous, and I wish I could be as eloquent as that last caller. And
I'm sure you will be.
Martin Lewis, he's an absolute hero. But I just wanted to try and put forward my theory, and that is that these people, certain people, are terrified of the loss of white male dominance. They've been, they've been top of the heap for how many hundreds of years over women, poor people, coloured people, brown people, and they don't want that to change. They don't want to have to share.
What about people who don't feel dominant at all? Are you suggesting they are, actually? I mean, they have enjoyed entrenched advantage over others, even as so you could be the bottom of the white man's ladder, but you're still going to be above an awful lot of other people, and you're damned if you want to slip still. You'll feel like you're slipping. You're giving me a variation on the theory that if you've spent your whole life enjoying privilege, then equality feels like oppression.
I think that it's partly probably quite a primitive instinct.
Yes, I do.
It's quite tribal.
If I shout fire, there's nothing wrong necessarily in running for the door, is there? You're under attack. What are you going to do? Are you going to run for safety, or are you going to check to see whether you are actually under attack or not?
I think that people, certain people do feel under attack, but they can't actually work out who's attacking them.
So here's the question.
So they attack the wrong people.
How do you help somebody like that without patronising or condescending or all the other things one gets accused of when one tries to help people see reality as opposed to the propaganda and manipulations that they've fallen for? How do you help someone who let's posit now a random geezer, let's call him John. John thinks that people like Sadiq Khan are trying to get rid of whiteness and replace it with brownness. How do you help John?
I'm afraid with the likes of Rupert Murdoch in control, I don't think you can.
Well, that's not a very upbeat analysis, Ruby.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, I can't. Obviously, go on.
I wish I had a
Well, some people would have done it. Some people would have done it. Some people would have had a go. Some people would have already been on the journey. They'd have come back into the light. They'd have said, do you know what? I used to believe that stuff. What works? What are the tactics that we could all deploy with family members, with friends, with listeners, with callers even? I genuinely don't know, because I find it so ridiculous. But quite a few of you are pointing out that lots of ridiculous things have happened in recent years because people believed stuff that they wanted to believe but wasn't true. They wanted to believe that the European Union was like some sort of Fourth Reich. They wanted, or the EU-SSR, they wanted to believe that they had their parliament's lawmaking capacity taken away, or that they weren't able to have a bigger say over what sort of people could and couldn't come into the country. I mean, it is easy to persuade people of things that aren't true. How you dissuade them, I think, is a much more urgent and difficult question. You avoid the doubling down, the sunk cost fallacy. And here we are. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. That clip you just played, says Ben in Exeter, makes me wonder why every time a Tory MP says woke, the interviewer doesn't say, how do you define woke? Do you know, I made that point in my first book before the word woke even existed in common parlance. I think I was saying it about political correctness. Ask them what the words mean. And I'd add sovereignty to that list, or political correct. Ask them what the words mean if they keep spouting them. Do you know what I saw today? And we haven't even played the jingle. It's not really a jingle. What do we call it? If it's the sound effect. Stab. Is it a stab? Is that the technical term? We haven't even played the stab. That's the technical term, you know. I read today someone's been hired to battle wokery in the NHS. Did you know this? So if you get to interview that person, first thing you ask them, what is wokery in the context of the NHS? Because someone's now being paid to battle it. I might play the stab after this. I mean, there were days, there's been a period, I don't know if you were listening at the time, but there was a period, it wasn't even that long ago, where I'd almost hesitate to turn the news on in the morning because there'd have been another atrocity. It was when the death throes of ISIS were underway and terror attacks across the West were on the increase. France, I think, bore the brunt, really, of European attacks. And there were atrocities in America as well. You think of the Florida nightclub shooting. And it felt at one point as if we were being overwhelmed by these atrocities. And so it was with almost a sense of shame, certainly a sense of incredulity, that I just trotted through earlier the crimes comparable to the one undertaken in Buffalo, New York over the weekend. And you know, just a cursory summation. You'd have the El Paso attack when 21 people were killed in, quotes, response to the Hispanic invasion of Texas. Several attacks on synagogues, including October 2018 and in Pittsburgh and San Diego in April 2019. A black church, a black community church in South Carolina, left 9 dead. So actually, given that none of those Islamist terror attacks happened in the UK, in the period that I'm thinking of, the mass murders, I find it increasingly unbelievable that not only are we talking about another white supremacist terror attack in America without recognising what an earlier caller described as the direction of traffic more widely, but also the fact that he singled out Sadiq Khan as an enemy, the mayor of London as an enemy. And one wonders what would have happened if it was a different type of terrorist singling out a different type of politician. Scary, right? 19 minutes after 12 is the time. But I need to understand stuff better. I need to understand how an 18-year-old man from Buffalo, or he wasn't from Buffalo, but that's where he ended up. How could he end up thinking that white people were being disappeared by politicians determined to replace them with brown and black people? How does anyone end up believing that? Or, indeed, that teaching the realities of racism through the ages and the relationship, the intersectionality between law and race is in any way controversial. You're not responsible for it. Is that how it works? They think all white people are responsible for it? You're responsible for slavery? So you're driving a forklift truck in Hartlepool and someone comes along and says you're responsible for the Holocaust that was slavery. You've got two choices. Either you're going to bridle and take enormous offence at being fingered for something you had nothing to do with, or you're going to laugh in their face. And I spend my life wondering why more people don't do more laughing in the face of these kind of provocateurs and propagandists. Callum's in Murray in Scotland. Callum, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just talking about really people getting this information to them, and something really surprising happened during the local elections in Murray. I stood for councillor, was unsuccessful, but as I was standing, there was more paperwork that came through my door from far-right organisations than came through from, say, Lib Dems or Labour. There were larger posters. So I have in my hands right now the documentation that came through my door, and I'm not going to mention their name because they're a horrible organisation, that was printed in Leeds, sent up to Murray, distributed by hand through Facebook groups, and talks directly about Great Replacement Theory, talks directly about London becoming a black capital of the world, then links it all to the NHS being crippled because of all these immigrants coming in.
Well, these are Brexit arguments reheated, aren't they, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's fronted by Farage's favourite picture, but with a new headline on it.
You mean the Breaking Point poster, the image that Farage unveiled on the day that Joe Cox was murdered by another white supremacist terrorist?
Well, yeah, and that's the picture they're using, with different typeface on the front. I'm not going to mention the organisation. So I got this through my door during the middle of the election, and I just was shocked by this. And then I looked into how much carbon, how much water they were using to produce these documents, and it's huge. So even just looking at it from a comparison of the financial impact these are having and how they're distributing them, there's money behind this. People are spending money on promoting this silently into people's mailboxes, and at the same time as that was coming through my door, I also got a copy of the Light newspaper, which also expounds on critical Great Replacement theories, COVID denier nonsense, etc.
They go hand in hand, do they? So along with forced birth as well, the people that want to abolish abortion are quite into all this as well. Emma's given me a couple of heads up. They're rejecting maths books in Florida because some of them apparently contain critical race theory. Why, Callum, and you may not have given this any thought, although you're a bit closer to the action than I was or am, why do people fall for it?
Well, I had two people in the last month that I've talked about this. One of them was a gardener that came to court for a job, who thinks Fox News was brilliant, Trump was great, everything he said was correct. And on a surface level, he was supporting the team because he thought that team was the team he wanted to be with. He thought they were successful. And I spent about an hour and a half talking to him. He came to court for a gardener, but they give him the job at the end of the day. I spent an hour talking to him saying, well, why are you why are you more worried about a Mexican coming into America than about people dying from COVID in the UK? Why are you more worried about, I kept pulling out the alternatives. Why are you focusing over here when they've stolen this much money for PPE? And even when you give him a logical argument to follow, but I quite like Fox News. I said, do yourselves a favour. He'd said he'd been banned from Facebook, and he'd lost work previously because of his views, and his mindset was not positive. And I said, just stop watching Fox News and Facebook for 2 weeks and see if you're happier as a person, because you're not happy just now, and they're making you less and less happy. So that was my pitch to him. Now, I doubt he's changed, but that's the first thing.
What did he get? So apart from that sense of belonging, which is obviously not something he's been able to find anywhere else in his life, and I don't say that to be rude, I just say if you felt loved and valued elsewhere in your life, you're unlikely to need the comfort of feeling the company of fellow racists, let's call it what it is. What does he get out of it? Is that it? Just company? A sense of belonging somewhere?
It's affirmation, isn't it? His life is valuable.
But that's chicken and egg, though, isn't it? I mean, what was he like before? What made him susceptible to that? rhetoric.
I think in that, so there's two circumstances. The next one's someone that's graduated is a graduate I can talk about, but this guy is effectively not as well educated as some people. The information he's getting is very heavily streamed.
Right.
He's been exploited by the people feeding this information, and he's supporting them financially by watching Fox News, etc. So he is a marketable
that's a very, we shouldn't overlook that, but that's more explaining the motivations of the propagandists and the hate preachers rather than the flock. I mean, you know, we had similar conversations about Islamist terrorism going right back to September the 11th, and odd though it sounds, there was at least a certain logic to the belief that you were going to be rewarded in heaven with 72 virgins or whatever it was. I could actually begin almost to get my head around that. These guys, I guess, get a form also of martyrdom, do they? Or this one lived. Some of them don't live, but they are what, folk heroes? Anders Behring Breivik, is he a martyr? I mean, what do they get out of it?
But I think this is one side of it, but the second side of this is this really racist material and the light newspaper coming through my door really upsets me. I'm a very big scientist and chemical engineer, etc. So I get really upset about this. But the same replacement theory wording was coming from a conservative supporter who lives in Swansea, whom we're talking about politics for about 2 hours on Saturday night. He's my partner's friend from school, or from university.
Right.
And he was coming out with the same rhetoric as a Conservative Party member. And what's actually happened here is these pamphlets go out, the light newspaper goes out, the Facebook posts go out, and you think it's talking to the racists. I don't think it is. I think it's talking to the Conservative supporters and changing their framework every day.
Obviously, they would deny that, and just because he's a member of the party doesn't mean that he's necessarily representative of a common experience. But you have to wonder who it's designed to appeal to. If it's not designed to appeal to the same people as Nigel Farage's posters, then who? Who is it designed to appeal to?
If you think of it the other way around, I'm a Conservative. I see... I'm not going to mention the name of the two organisations. I see this come through my door. I'm not a racist because I'm not aligning with them.
Yeah.
But everything that they do that is racist is then acceptable because they're not as bad as this other group. And it's all about where they position themselves in their own head. And even talking about sending people to Rwanda, I think it's a great thing. It'll solve the illegal refugee problem. I said, you can't have illegal refugees. Well, it'll solve the problem. And that whole discussion started from there. And I work in Africa. I lived in Benin City for a lot of the slave trade comes from Africa through to Europe. And he just didn't have any concept about what it actually meant, how many people.
But again, maybe I'm being too kind, but again, if someone whispers in your ear, incoming, gunfire, you jump for cover, you run for cover, and maybe you feel an enormous debt of loyalty or gratitude to the person who's warned you. You never bother checking whether there was ever actually any gunfire. And now that's just my simplistic way of making sense of it. Callum, thank you. Again, grateful for people who've devoted more energy to thinking about this stuff already than I have, although I'm rapidly arriving at the conclusion that we're going to have to find a new way of approaching this kind of thing, because didn't forget about Joe Cox, but talking about this as if it's new or a tipping point or pivotal when we've had our own white supremacist terrorists in this country. The mosque attack as well in North London, wasn't there, in Finsbury Park, and the stuff that was in his glove box, the manifestos, it's there. Mystery after Islamist terror attacks. You go, who radicalised them? We know who radicalises these people. And some of them draw salaries in the same business that I'm in. It's nuts, right? Nick's in Wrexham. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Nick.
In 2018, I was involved in what was a standoff between a group that came to Wrexham. I won't mention their name on air.
Okay.
And I did tell you researcher, just because I don't want to promote them.
Fair enough.
And their big thing is the Great Replacement. So they came to Wrexham, and they brought with them supplies and provisions for our rough sleepers, our homeless.
Okay.
They were going around giving out food, hats, gloves, scarves, coats, this sort of thing, to come across as a nice guy.
Yes.
And then they had with them...
What would they do if they encountered a black homeless person?
Well,
that didn't happen, or...
And not that I'm aware of,
Okay,
no.
just that's the way my mind works. Sorry, go on, carry on. That was an unhelpful interruption.
I know, but it's one that I hadn't thought of. Yeah. But yeah, it would be interesting to know. But yeah, and this is what they were doing, and there was a group of us when we set up to basically disrupt them, to be honest.
Right.
I have got a good relationship with the people on the street. I know quite a lot of them. I've done quite a lot with charities and helped out providing provision for them. And the thought that they were going to essentially radicalise these people, it just turned my stomach. So,
well, you can see why it might work. So you'd say to a homeless person, the only reason you're homeless is because there's a brown family over there living in your house.
That's exactly what they were doing. Exactly what they were doing. And they were saying, you're not getting that help because they're giving it to them over there.
And that's where it comes from. God.
That's where it comes from. And I think also from interacting with these people, because I was trying to have a conversation with these, because a lot of them were just young kids.
Yes.
And just ask them questions. Nothing too taxing, nothing too much. Just say to them, why do you think this is a problem? And they were saying the number of people who are Muslim are rising. And I was like, well, first of all, why is that a problem? I don't understand why you think that's such an issue.
Right.
And why do you think it's by design and not just because more people maybe, I don't know, just go down that route? And they just couldn't answer at this, and then they just resort to insults.
Of course, because membership is more important than rationality. What do you think they get out of it?
This is what your previous caller, Callum, who's very good, by the way.
He was, so are you.
I think what he was... Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I think a lot of it comes down to that camaraderie, that sort of brotherhood, that, teammate sort of mentality.
I saw that, and I saw a really extreme version of that during the pandemic as well, with the vaccine. People, sacrificing lifelong friendships and family relations for their fellow anti-vax mates on Facebook and online. You see a similar psychological process, perhaps.
Yeah, don't get me started on that one.
No, I won't. I'm late for the news already, Nick, but thank you for that. And thank you for what you did as well. I mean, it is often the case that you simply need to ask the simplest of questions. It's almost like I'm giving away trade secrets, but it's not exactly rocket science, is it? Just to say, what do you mean when you use that word? Or what do you mean that? Or what happens if? And how does that? But no one ever does. That's what's so bizarre. That's what's so remarkable. And then you get the false equivalence. So, now here's someone who believes in the Great Replacement Theory. Ooh, welcome to the BBC. I don't know if they do that yet, but it wouldn't be beyond... you're going to get Pascal Lamy and Andrea Leadsom to argue about what the World Trade Organization represents. It's not beyond possibility that you're going to have a guest popping up soon who'll talk you through exactly what why the West really is under constant attack from foreigners. And my next guest, and you sit here going, I can't quite, what are they going to get on next? Someone telling you that the moon's made of cheese? And then you remember the climate science debate and think, yeah, probably they will. I'm a little bit discombobulated. I haven't used that word for a while. You used to use it every day, several times a day. Then Anton Deck nicked it off me. As soon as Anton Deck started saying it on the telly, I thought, I'm going to have to come up with a new word. I haven't come up with one yet. Should we do a woke watch? I think we should probably do a woke watch today. Very serious woke watch last week. I don't know if you were listening, but the story of the students who took down a picture of the Queen turned out to be about 1 million miles from what was actually reported in most of the right-wing media, in a story that was among the first to really go in hard on the word woke. Really haunted me a bit over the weekend, that, thinking about how many other people have had their lives turned upside down by right-wing lies under the banner of woke, anti-woke. Bizarre. It's reached the NHS today. A little bit more on that in a moment. But for now, I suppose there's a woke element to this. People who are opposed to white supremacism, are they woke? Are we woke? Down with white supremacist terrorists? Is that wokery out of control? Wokery out of... I don't know, but I do know this. The Great Replacement Theory is the biggest load of cobblers I've heard since Brexit. And yet, I learn as the conversation goes on that it has traction already in this country. Opposition to critical race theory is like that National Trust debate in microcosm, isn't it? Whereby, stop telling me stuff that's real and true because it makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm white. Doesn't make me feel uncomfortable. The Holocaust of slavery, it happened. It was perpetrated by Western people upon African people with the connivance of some African people, just as you always need people on the inside job. But you sometimes hear people say, well, I think you'll find that they were sold by their own people, as if that... What does that do? I mean, no one's claiming that white people have an exclusive monopoly upon appalling behaviour any more than... that's the whole point, isn't it, about equality, is that everyone's capable of doing appalling things. And the best way of establishing that is by looking properly and honestly at the history of appalling things. And if you happen to live in a in a Western European country, then you're going to be looking at the history of what Western European countries have done. If you live in America, you're going to be looking at the history of what America has done. If you live in Rwanda, you're going to be looking at the history of what Rwanda has done. And then other stuff. But to begin with, you look at what's going on your own doorstep, or what has happened on your own doorstep. John's in Lambeth. John, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello,
Good
John.
Afternoon. Good afternoon.
You choose.
How you
It's
doing?
true. They're both true somewhere. Carry on.
It was a brilliant show again. I always listen to your points are really hard hitting, and that raises the question. In regards to the current topic that you've been discussing this morning, I always want to understand why there is a discussion within, to put it bluntly, white people. I think white people need to have the discussions within themselves as to what is the great replacement theory, like you have highlighted, and some of your previous callers have highlighted as well. And once that conversation is had within yourselves, within themselves, then there will be an answer as to how they can eradicate the theory or eradicate the mindset.
The fear.
Yes, there is a fear. There's an insecurity. One of your previous callers mentioned, once you have power over a long period of time, it will be very hard for you to relinquish that power. So once that power is then relinquished, or is on the threat of relinquishment, you're going to go all hard to try and change the narrative or change the directive of how...
But you're not relinquishing power so much as sharing it. But that would feel like a relinquishing if you'd never had to share it before. And my particular problem is for the people, and these are the pawns in the game, if you like, the people who are, in a way, getting it from all sides, are the people who don't feel like they have any power at all. And so they're listening to this now, and they're listening to you and me chew the fat and describing them as white people having all the power, and they feel utterly, utterly powerless. So they become, immediately, they become by far the best, most fertile ground for racist provocateurs and for espousers of these ludicrous theories. But they also... they have a valid grievance. That's the bit we need to get past.
Yeah.
They are powerless. They are rained on from a great height by the people in charge, and you can't tell them that they're not, even if they don't carry the burden of being victims of racism. They got way more burdens than I do, for example.
100%. Now, the problem that this now raises, a mindset of negativity.
Yes.
It now raises a mindset of blame. Who can I blame for my demise? Who can I blame for the situation not going my way? And that is what breeds these great replacement theory ideologies. That's why we had an atrocity, unfortunately, over the weekend.
Yeah.
We've seen it over the years. New Zealand last year, Finsbury Park you highlighted in the mosque.
Yes.
It's happening all the time. And if it's one settled group, we will call it for what it is. If it's another settled group, if it's a white person, we'll call it for something more less than what it really is. Now the question needs to be raised between ourselves, within the white people, within their spaces. Ask the question. The truth hurts.
But that's what the National Trust tried to do, you see. I know you know this, but you're making stuff fall into place for me. National Trust tries to have these conversations, not necessarily specifically about great replacement theory, but about certainly critical race theory.
Definitely.
And suddenly everyone from the Telegraph down is got their knickers in such a twist that they can't even see straight anymore. You can't have that they're terrified of the conversation, John.
But that conversation needs to be had, James. It needs to be had, because if it's not had, then everyone's just going to be sat there like, I don't know what they're on about. Oh, it's all right for me. Oh, I'm all right. Oh, it will blow. It will blow. It needs to be had, because if it's not had, unfortunately, it pains me to say it, we're not going to see the last of it.
No, well, we're not, and you're right.
Because someone's going to have that ideology that, hang on.
Someone else is going to read it, someone else is going to look at the manifesto, someone's going to be inspired by this ghoul in the way that he was inspired by previous ghouls. Okay, and that it can be directed at me. You need to have these conversations. But who with? Do you have the conversations with the actual Nazis who are espousing this stuff and writing this stuff? I don't know that you should. I don't know. And then again, important to stress that nobody knows everything.